Great. Well, welcome everybody to our fourth and final fall PAC chat with the Postsecondary Advocates Coalition. And for those who are joining us today for the first time, the Texas Postsecondary Advocates Coalition is a group of organizations across Texas focused on equity in college access, admissions, affordability, and completion. And we're so excited for our conversation today. Our last event focused on financial aid for undocumented and documented Texans. And we had a really pivotal discussion about supporting students through the college financial aid process. So today, we're going to be focused on another key component of college access, which is admissions itself. And we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has placed a very unique challenge on students' future planning for college right now. Rapid changes to higher ed have brought on more questions than answers as institutions navigate this pandemic. And the college admission process is already extremely difficult for many students to navigate. So with this pandemic, we know that it's only going to be more difficult, which is why it's so crucial that we're really talking about what we're doing to create student supports for students to be able to navigate this process. And we'll talk about those recommendations and supports today. And I am so excited to introduce our incredible facilitator for this discussion, Dr. Chloe Latham Sykes.
Thanks, Christina. And I know pet management has become a whole new part of our work life, so it's fun to hear the puppies in the background. Yes, good afternoon. I'm Chloe Latham Sykes, the Deputy Director of Policy at IDRA, Intercultural Development Research Association. Very happy and honored to facilitate today's conversation. And I will start by briefly introducing our panelists and then kicking it over them to give a bit more introduction. We welcome Nick Howell from Pflugerville High School in Pflugerville ISD as a college admissions counselor. Christy Almeida at Breakthrough Central Texas. Breakthrough is a member of the Postsecondary Advocates Coalition, so very happy to have our members sharing their expertise. And Josue Rodriguez with Young Invincibles on the line as well, so to offer a student perspective. So I will go ahead and hand it all over to you all in that order, Nick and Christy and Josue, to just share perhaps a bit about your experience and expertise and how long you've been in this work on supporting college admissions for rising seniors, and then we'll jump into some of our more particular questions. So Nick,
awesome.
We're ready.
Well, hello, welcome everyone. Again, my name is Nick Howell. I serve as the College and Career Advisor at Pflugerville High School. I'm in my second year in that role, but previous to that, I have worked for about 15 years with 4 different public institutions in the state of Texas and 1 outside the state of Texas, in multiple roles in admissions, from leading an office to being the person that walks into your high school and helps you through the application process, many different roles in that area.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina, or Christy Almeida. I am an associate director of high school programs for Breakthrough Central Texas. In short, Breakthrough supports students who will be the first in their family to go to college. I have been at Breakthrough now 9 years, very proud of that, and I'm a proud daughter of Mexican immigrants and a first-generation college graduate myself. I've been in this particular role supporting seniors now, I think I'm coming up on 3 years, and really excited to be here today.
Welcome, and Josue.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josue Rodriguez. Thank you all for being here today. I am one of Young Invincibles Texas organizing coordinators, and have worked with YI advocating for higher education. I myself am also a first-generation college student. I just graduated in August, so finally. I am also DACAmented, so I have firsthand experience dealing with a lot of the topics that we're going to be discussing today. But thank you all for being here today.
Thank you. appreciate your time. And I should mention, while this webinar does focus on tips for college admissions in general, we do want to uplift a special focus on undocumented and documented students who are navigating either particular challenges and different circumstances in the college application process. So we look forward to a rich discussion, and we'll start it off by everyone's favorite, COVID-19. So for this is a general question for each of you to feel free to answer. What does the admissions process look like this year? Application and admissions, I should say, while we're all grappling with the ramifications of COVID-19. Are there specific challenges that have been created for the application and admissions process? And are there any unforeseen silver linings that we should know about, that students and families should know about?
Yeah, so I think one thing to know as you start to navigate this college enrollment, college application process, one of the things to know is that some schools really have worked to help students with this. And one of those ways that I'll mention is you will see that it may be tough to go get an SAT or an ACT done. And that is something that's really changing in this application process, because over 1,500 of our colleges and universities across the nation have gone what's called test optional. That can actually be a silver lining as well for you, because I am going to believe that all of my panelists will agree that the SAT and ACT isn't always the best look at how successful you are going to be in college. And so it allows you to really showcase your organizations you've been involved in, or your grades, or different areas of who you are, to really showcase to the college why you should be admitted. And so that is a silver lining, I would say, is that opportunity to be test optional. You will want to check with each school, as that test optional process is very different per each institution.
And I'll just add to what Nick is saying. Like most things, many things are now in a virtual platform. More so, I mean, even before this year, a lot of the college application process requires navigating websites, portals, or even events like this one, like this webinar. So that's heightened this year, having to navigate all those things. And it's hard for any student doing this, but it's even harder for our undocumented and documented students in reaching out to your counselors, right? Reaching out to, if you're learning remotely, if you're learning in person, managing those systems, figuring out how to communicate with whoever is supporting you at school, like someone like Nick. And on top of that, it's like figuring out how to identify yourself as a non-US citizen and a Texas resident, right? That can be tricky as well. So reaching out to support to again, people like Nick on your campus. I have a couple other different things. I mean, just like many students, you're learning the system by on your own, but also having to translate most, if not some of this information back to your family who might not be fluent in English, and figuring out what are the steps that they need to take versus the steps that you need to take is also something that I've seen this year. And I will say the silver lining is schools going test optional or test not required, because, well, I'll just leave it at that.
I will add that my first semester in college, right after I graduated high school, I actually only took one class, just because it was such a transition, especially for somebody who is documented, to navigate financial aid, all the different resources that were available to me. So I can only imagine what students would have to deal with in higher education that is more remote. And that's assuming that they are comfortable kind of identifying themselves as either undocumented or documented, because if you are identified as an international student, then it creates a whole different hurdle that you would have to get through. So it's a very complex and fluid situation that a lot of first generation students now have to navigate themselves. And luckily, they will have somebody to guide them, but oftentimes they do not.
I want to jump in really quickly, if that's okay. One of the last things I want to mention is that one of the other silver linings is you have a lot more access to the actual college admissions representatives at this time. So you may be able to be able to talk to someone virtually from a school nowhere near you, right? And so that's something that's really important to point out as you start to connect with your high school counselor, some of the great folks in your high school that can help you through this process. But there's a lot of admissions counselors out there that are here to help you as well for that specific college. And so that's somebody I would tell you to definitely reach out and find, and that's quickly found on their admissions websites.
That's really wonderful information. Thank you, each of you. And I think it's a good segue into our next question of, we talked a lot about just the challenges of navigating this process anyway, much less right now. And then we talked about the silver lining being the optional SAT and ACT being optional or not required at this time. But for someone who just is entering this process and it's totally new to them, which is many of our students, what would you recommend for current seniors or for students currently applying for the next academic year? What specific steps should they be taking as they consider SAT or ACT registration or not, as they just approach their college search? And also, as Josue brought out, consider financial aid, particularly with, potentially ongoing virtual college classes in the next year or so. So what should they be thinking about in their college search, application, and admissions process specifically at this time?
I can start us off here, and hopefully, Nick, I don't take too much of what y'all are going to say. But first, with the college search, the first thing I recommend students is to look into Hispanic serving institutions. They're known as HSIs. Who are likely to have an office or a program that supports undocumented or documented students. One example is the Monarch Center at Texas State. We love the Monarch Center. And so that's part of your college search. Like mentioned before, reaching out directly to admissions counselors and asking questions. What kind of support do you have for undocumented students or documented students? What kind of financial aid resources do you have? And they want to hear from y'all. They want to hear from students who are applying. They have the time, and that is their job. I know picking up the phone for this generation is really hard. Y'all want to go to text, y'all want to go to email, but pick up that phone, y'all. They're ready to answer your phone call. I also want to share a document that we use with our breakthrough students. It's a college application pro tip. It's applying to college is not just hitting submit within that portal. Apply Texas, you have to get pay for the application or find a free waiver. Send your test scores if that's what you want to do. Retrieve your transcripts, essays, create essays and things like that. So I'm going to drop that in the chat for all of you who are students.
Thank you.
And I think Christy hit it really on the nail. One of the things I'd kind of add to that is staying organized. So colleges do have these things called deadlines that you want to make sure you're following, and they're each going to request different materials from you. So you will find that, as crazy as it sounds, there's only 2 public schools in the state of Texas that currently require an essay for admissions purposes. And that sounds kind of crazy, right? But an essay can actually help your admission. It can help you get scholarships. And so it's a good idea to make sure that even though Texas State may not require an essay for admissions, it's a strong idea to send it because then they know that you're interested. So making sure that you are creating some kind of Google Doc or something to stay organized with deadlines, what each school requires, what is optional at those institutions, is going to really help you to stay navigating this process. I usually tell my students that for the state of Texas, for the better or worse, our application deadlines are earlier than other states. And so I usually tell students that you really want to complete those applications. And again, that doesn't mean just submit. That means going further with those transcripts and whatever else you need to send in by Halloween. So if you are a current senior, you really want to make sure everything's in by Halloween, because that's when a lot of our priority deadlines start to hit. So you've got UT's prior deadlines November 1st. University of Houston moved up their deadline to November 1st. So there's some different things that you want to make sure you're following there.
That's super helpful, Nick and Christy. Josue, I know you are a bit closer to this process in recent memory. Is there anything that worked really well for you in your own college search and admissions process, or things you wish you'd done?
Absolutely. So I think Nick has hit the nail right on the head. Is being organized. I think as undocumented, I was an undocumented student before I graduated high school, and I remember that I was very cognizant of the fact that I didn't qualify for federal student loans due to my status. Therefore, I knew I wanted to go to college, so it was just a matter of looking for other options and looking for scholarships. And it can be a lot because you are applying for college, especially if you're a first generation student. So doing that and doing scholarships on the side can be a huge task, not to mention that you're still in school, So I think that being organized and really like taking that initiative yourself, it would put you ahead. It will put you ahead, but in reality, it will put you in the same platform as the rest of your colleagues who may not be in your situation. So that's just the reality of things. So staying organized is probably one of the best things that college or rising seniors and undocumented students can do.
Great, thank you. And I know if you all have resources or other things, drop them in the chat. I'm sure folks will want to know. Christy, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but in case you're on your mobile and you can't see the chat super well, for those of you who are seniors and would like a spreadsheet that will help you keep organized, all of those different components of the college application, fee waivers, again, transcripts, application, essays, all of that. I'm happy to send you an email. I don't have it super updated today because I need to add a link for the updated TASFA application. But please email me. I'm happy to send you a copy back.
Great, thank you. And thanks for making yourself available. We're gonna, we've been talking about the individual step-by-step process. We're gonna zoom out to kind of our current context a little bit right now. And I know you all are very familiar with probably all the pressures that are affecting just our society in general, and then the college admissions process. So with COVID-19, with the advent of more and more virtual classes, virtual schooling, both in K-12 and higher education, and also with potentially a different Supreme Court justice who could weigh in on immigration-related decisions and a DACA decision were it to return to the Supreme Court. There are a lot of things affecting our current conversation today. What impact have you all seen or anticipate happening to college admissions as a result of the pandemic? And I'm going to broaden the pandemic and also just all of our current context right now. And do you think any of that will be isolated just to this year, or do you see the terrain of college admissions starting to shift? Christy, you look like you have a thought.
I have many thoughts. I just so I don't know if you wanted to go first, but so the question is, as a result of this, what is the effect and how does it ripple onto the next year? Well, first, and I know this is part of the conversation we're going to have later, but the fact that DACA was repealed and TPS is being removed is such an unfortunate and horrible thing that has happened. I mean, students in positions that are either documented or undocumented need to find additional financial resources in order to pay their way through college. So a student might be accepted and might be ready to go, but it all comes down to the finances. Are they able to commit to that? On another side of that, it's I really hope that with this test optional and test not required, and I'm going to say this is a personal opinion, not my organization, is that it might show universities and colleges that we don't need the ACT or the SAT scores, because we know it's biased and it produces other systemic barriers. So hopefully that ripples into other years. And going back to another thing that we've seen is, students are struggling learning remotely. I mean, we're struggling working from home, right? And so their academic progress might be affected. Your academic progress might be affected, and hopefully that is temporary, and we can go back in person next year for the next grades, for the next years of seniors and students. So I'll pause there.
I can chime in. I think so. I did my capstone project for my undergrad at the University of St. Thomas. Was looking at the impact that headlines, just news headlines, can have on immigrant communities, stress levels, awareness level, and it was high across the board with a simple headline. So it's important to keep in mind that regardless of what happens, just a simple thing, that the simple fact that it is on the headlines and it's being talked about, and there's a differences of opinions being broadcasted, has an impact in itself within immigrant communities, which will also call that, or should lead into our work, trying to advocate for systems that are more streamlined, to take some of the burden off the students who are trying to better themselves. So that's the first part. The second part is it is an unfortunate time, not only speaking as a documented person, but just because I have so many friends and I'm part of networks, and we're all on edge. But it should go without saying that regardless of what happens, an education will always push it forward, whether you can work legally or not. It's a tool that's what your parents fought for. That's what they sacrificed for. So it should go without saying that regardless of what happens, you should always prioritize education and pursue it. Whether or not you're going to be able to work here legally or not, that might be a topic for a different day, but focus on what you can do now, and that's pursuing that higher education.
Nick, anything to add on that front?
I am not sure I could have said anything better, so I will leave it right there.
All right. Yeah, and those are all really helpful recommendations and thoughts. So my next question is, we kind of addressed this, but from what you know of current college students, perhaps Nick, the students that you counseled last year, and Christy, the students of last year, and Josue, what your experience was last year, what is the college experience like, or might it be like, as they start not only this year, but going into, to next year, having gone perhaps through their final year of high school in this type of environment? What can you tell us so far about college experience during COVID-19?
I think one of the things that I'm seeing with my class of 2020 is that the organizations are still there to get involved in. The student life is really still there. It may be virtual for the time being, but you can still get involved. You can still get those opportunities that a full college experience, if you will, a traditional college experience can offer. And so a lot of my students may have chosen to possibly do online learning. And so a lot of them may have stayed home this year. I think a lot of them are also saying, you know what, I may have stayed home this year, but I know for a fact next year I'm going to go get an apartment near the college so that I can do that and go through that process. So that's something I'm seeing. The other thing I'm seeing that very much interested me is that the four-year institutions in the state of Texas, the public ones that I know of, their enrollment is actually up. So the enrollment of the enrollment of University of Houston, they're actually up, which was something I was pleasantly surprised about. But then I always remember the thing that I will always tell all of my students. We are in a different spot here in Pflugerville. And so one of the things that I will tell our students is it's actually just as expensive to go to ACC as it is to go to Texas State. And so students will often say, hey, I'm going to go do my first year at ACC, and this is what happened with my last year's class. A lot of them thought that was the process. And it's really thinking about what type of college experience you want and understanding that there are opportunities out there for students that will actually guarantee you tuition and fees at a four-year institution if you start out there first, especially with students that might be of low SES status or whatever it may be. So something to really think about as you go through those. Those are typically called the promises. So Cougar Promise, Red Raider Promise, so on and so forth as the schools you're looking at.
I can chime in here. So what we know about the class of 2020, they have ganas as well. Like I like to say, they have the dedication. They have the mindset of, yes, this is what I'm going to accomplish. So that's something that is really great to hear and really inspiring. On the other side of that, and I talked to my colleague who's we call that the team, and COVID has dramatically altered college life. Navigating institutional barriers will become more challenging. They're more challenging because of this. Transmitting sensitive data like through non-secure communication challenges might be something that a student encounters, or exacerbating particular vulnerabilities like that, relating to jobs, to healthcare, to, secure employment, reliable technology even, right? Having a laptop, having access to a Wi-Fi is super important right this year, and even high-end food security. So one thing I, again, encourage you all, those of you who are still are starting this first year or in your in college, is to think about the resources that are on campus. And I'm again going to drop a link in the chat with some of the questions you could be asking yourself in terms of navigating these resources that you might have on your campus. It's great questions to ask, and from who are my allies, where are my gente or people who support you, who are your allies, and how you can reach out to them, to having an emergency plan. So I'll drop that in just a second.
And I can chime in really quickly. Over the summer, I actually did some research on the impacts of COVID-19 on college students, and there's this common idea that education is the great equalizer. And I think that there's certain things that have been proposed or implemented that give students from all backgrounds equal footing on a college, once they get into college. I think what COVID did is that COVID sort of like opened up the curtains into what's behind the students' experience. So the things that they deal with outside of college. So although education may be able to equalize everyone's and be able to provide them with equal footing, there's still differences of experience. And I think that's been highly, it's been apparent now, because we're able to see that there are discrepancies within the experiences that a lot of students face. A great example is I grew up in the southwest area of Houston, Texas, and I saw some COVID data, and it showed that that small neighborhood, which is primarily and predominantly immigrants, was 1,000% higher in infection rates than the neighborhoods around it. And I asked myself why. Well, a lot of those people are frontline workers, and they're the ones that are being exposed. So what you have now is that the college experience varies a lot depending on the background of each student. And I think this is a great opportunity for universities and colleges to say, well, let's take into account that experience, not only in the admissions of that they have to get into college or university, but rather in their policies what does that look like? It's an open conversation, but at least that conversation is being had now.
Exactly right. And that's a great segue into our next question is, what would you all like to see from state policymakers about the college admissions process? And I'll expand that to also be just regarding higher education access during, with COVID-19 and during the revenue shortfall we currently see. We know higher education could potentially take a hit financially in the state budget. That's something that organizations like Postsecondary Advocates Coalition is fighting against. But what would you say as folks who work on these issues daily to state policymakers about what they should do? Sway, you look like you might have some ideas to share.
Wow. First and foremost, don't take away any money that's already allocated. I think that's unfortunately going to be the priority of this legislative session. But as far as people of color or students of color, I would say TASFA needs to be revamped. It needs to be more funds need to be allocated to that so that students have that opportunity. I remember when I was fresh out of high school, just a thought that there was a scholarship for people in my situation with my status gave me hope and kind of pushed me to look for more. So that would be my first suggestion.
So don't cut a penny is what one recommendation is. Christy,
Yes.
you have more.
And so what would we like them to know about the college admissions process? Well, one of those things is, for students who are undocumented or documented, a lot of the times they are flagged for verification. Once you get to the point of receiving your financial aid package, what is flagged for verification? That's that they verify your information, they verify your household, they verify your income, your family income, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's, if knowing that that's either part of the process or one of the challenges that the students encounter, it is something to know. Secondly, we know that next year, Texas law, in order to graduate with your high school diploma, you have to have completed the FAFSA. Now, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's also the just a financial aid application, but from my understanding, it's the FAFSA. So with that, we have to be very careful about how we're supporting our Texas residents, right? How we're supporting every single student, and what that looks like. And additionally, educating individuals, college counselors on the completion of the TASFA. It's really unfortunate when we see our campus partners, not Nick Howell, our campus limited knowledge on completing the TASFA. And that's really important. I mean, like that one mistake, and you might not get aid. You pass the deadline to complete that, you will not get any money from the state of Texas. So that's one thing I would like to share with in terms of the college admission process.
Yeah, I'm going to piggy right back off that. I totally agree with Christy in the sense that we do need to make sure that there's very good training out there on how to work things like the TASFA, like SB 1528 that allows students to gain residency. Those types of things that are very important need to stay there, right? But I also would kind of go a step further, and I'm going to say this, and I'm probably going to be wishful thinking, but we need the state legislature to create more organizations like Breakthrough Central Texas, like Cafe College in San Antonio, those opportunities that really can help students navigate this a little bit easier, because there isn't always a college counselor in a high school. You may end up with high school counselors that, my high school counselors have changed schedules 3 times in the last week and a half. That's all they can do. So the one thing to keep in mind is that gaining some access and some money for not only the higher education side, but the K through 12 side to create support would be very important in my opinion.
That's fantastic. And we are writing these down because PAC does interact with legislators and has legislative briefings and a legislative audience that may be tuning in now or later to our recording of this. So those are all really, really helpful and useful recommendations. Before we open it up for Q&A, or for our last question and then Q&A, I wanted to circle back to a few of the items we've mentioned that folks might not be familiar with. Nick, you mentioned I think you were starting to get into the idea of, why students might need to reconsider a 2-year path versus a 4-year path right off the bat. And you mentioned some of the promise programs. For folks not as familiar, I'd love to double back to those. And then Christy or Josue, if y'all would like to share more spelling out what the FAFSA and TASFA are. I think we do know that the TASFA is in the process of being converted to electronic format to be available electronically. It's not available yet, is my understanding. But yes, if we could touch on those points for clarification before opening it up.
So I'll kind of start with those promise programs. What those are is simply put that when you fill out a FAFSA or a TASFA, you will be given the opportunity to gain either federal and or state funds to go to college. And if your family makes under a certain amount of money, for many institutions that's $65,000 or less, many of our institutions in the state of Texas, both public and private, so Rice included, actually will give your student full tuition and fees to attend for 4 years. And so that's very important that you look at those opportunities. And I don't necessarily want to tell a student definitely don't go to a 2-year institution first, because that's a great opportunity and that's a great way to get your feet wet. And there are definitely ways out there, Capital Idea, for example, here in Austin, that will help students pay for the education at Austin Community College and things like that. But what I would suggest that you do is look on your college or university's financial aid website to see if they have that promise opportunity. Almost all of our public institutions in the state do. Talk to your high school counselor, talk to a college and career advisor if you have one at your high school, whatever it may be. Certainly, I will always say this to anybody I talk to, you can always email me and I can shoot you in the right direction. And I will put my email in the chat so y'all have it. But whatever you need, that's what we're here to help you with. And those opportunities exist out there.
Thank you. And then, yeah, Christy or Josue, if either of you would like to spell out what the FAFSA and TASFA are for folks new to the higher ed lingo and acronyms, and a little bit about that.
Definitely. So TASFA is similar to the FAFSA, but it was created in Texas for students who do not qualify or are not citizens or undocumented or immigrant. And it provides a fund in the form of a grant for the student to be able to use during school. I think the most difficult hurdle for me personally was that my mother had not been doing taxes because she's undocumented, and she didn't work. So it was one of those things where I think that even if someone has not been working, or at least if they made some money, they're able to at least file taxes under the ITIN number. And that at least creates that record so that the student can then use that to then sign to use for the TASFA.
And just to build off of what Josue is saying, it's important that your parents or your guardians complete the taxes, and you can still do that, and it's not something that is you have to wait till a certain date. You can still do that at this time. And additionally, we go a step further and ask students to request their IRS tax transcript. So if your family did complete the taxes, did complete the taxes, and you have your application for the TASFA, sending it to the different schools, that you request a tax transcript. Again, I can put it in the chat, a guide on requesting the tax transcript. There's a couple of different options, and it's something that usually will be asked for from the institutions later down the line anyways. So you're doing it early, avoiding a lag in getting your financial aid package. Now, this is the most important thing to remember, is that you must send your TASFA to each school individually by January 15th. So if, aim for December at the latest, but January 15th is the deadline. After that deadline, it will be hard for you to get funding from the state of Texas, those grants that Jose was talking about. And again, that spreadsheet that I mentioned earlier on in this, it has some of the TASFA to-dos, your checklist, a cover page, and things like that. So if you are a senior, please reach out. I'm happy to forward that to you.
And I think I'll go really quickly, jumping back into the TASFA. Make sure you fill out every single piece of information on that form. I've got a great friend at Texas State University in financial aid. Unfortunately, they don't have the ability to email every single student to let them know they missed a part on that. It just doesn't get processed. So you want to make sure you're completing that very, very well. And the last thing I will mention is January 15th is the deadline. Keep in mind that there are institutions, I'm thinking about University of Texas at Dallas right now, where their scholarships require one of these two documents on hand by December 1. So we at Pflugerville High School go with a November 30th date for our students. And I think that's a wonderful way to do that, to make sure you're getting the most funds possible.
Those are all really helpful suggestions. I'm going to go ahead and invite folks, if they do have questions, to start putting them in the Q&A or chat, and Ashley will be able to monitor those. But I don't think we have any yet. So while we hopefully get to welcome any questions. I'm sorry, Christy, were you going to jump in?
No, I thought we had one more question about more policies. Do we have time for that, or can I just?
Yes, I was going to say, just as people get the juice flowing, that I wanted to end on that question. Yes, very exciting. We've talked about test optional admissions and how that might be a growing part of college admissions past the pandemic, that the pandemic has helped catalyze. We talked about the importance of pursuing higher education despite and because of and through the pandemic, and just how we need to really address continued inequities that we have in our college admissions and access system around financial aid, around students with undocumented or documented status gaining appropriate information and resources to pursue higher education. Do you all have any other policy solutions to these issues? And I'm going to ask Christy to go first because I think she's ready. But any policy solutions to these or any other issues, because we want to uplift those. Christy, go ahead.
I apologize, everyone. I'm just so excited. Down the road, hopefully what we say today here is heard. The people who are able to make the change. One of the biggest asks, and this comes from one of my colleagues, Arelis Palacios, who is very expert in this area, is to follow the lead of the University of California State University systems. They have, they created dedicated positions at every 2-year and 4-year degree granting institution, as California did at the state chancellor levels. Commitments to dedicated staff positions and offices at the majority of college campuses statewide to encourage retention and student persistence for undocumented students.
Wonderful. Great. Nick or Josue, any policy solutions or urgent policy matters before we open up the Q&A?
I think it's not so much a policy solution, but just I think it would be interesting to see some data gathered on what the financial circumstances that students are facing at this moment due to COVID. Since if you have a lot of first-generation students and their parents or their guardians are frontline workers or may have been laid off or furloughed or are unemployed, that population doesn't receive unemployment benefits if they are undocumented or immigrant. Therefore, you may have students who are the breadwinners at this time. So I would be interested in seeing more data gathered on that so that we can use that to navigate policy solutions.
This isn't necessarily policy, but Josue reminded me of something as we go through this. When you're filling out the FAFSA or TASFA, you are using 2019 tax year information. Okay, and so know that as you're going through it, again, 2019 tax year, a good chunk of folks going to college next year may have had family members who lost their job this year, or something may have happened where income changed. The way to work through that situation is you are going to fill it out with 2019 tax information done. Once you've done the FAFSA or TASFA with that information, you're going to contact your school for a special circumstance, as maybe your income levels or anything like that have changed this year. So that's how you work through that situation. It is definitely something that I know that my partner, who currently works for UT Austin, is helping students with and doing. So something to think about as you go through this.
Really good recommendations, and I think those serve well as parting words of wisdom too. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley to moderate some of the questions we've gotten.
Thank you, Chloe. I've been so happy to listen to and learn from the conversation so far. For folks who may not know, my name is Ashley Williams. I am the Higher Education Policy Analyst at Every Texan, formerly the Center for Public Policy Priorities. And I, again, co-lead the Postsecondary Advocates Coalition with Christina and YI, and I'm happy to be here with everyone and happy to get to ask you all some questions that I've got in the chat. I will just pose a question or two to folks, and anyone can take it, or I might, pick on you, classroom style, but no pressure. So for one question that seems not too unrelated from what we were just discussing, for students who are in this process of looking for what school to attend, what's the best match for them, and trying to figure out, what are the critical factors they should be considering, all in a digital world now, for the most part, what factors could you point to, or critical elements would you point to students and families to for identifying a place in which they might succeed virtually and without being able to visit the school?
I think first, in terms of finding a school that is a best fit, keep your options open. Christy gave some amazing advice earlier about checking in with different programs that might be at institutions that might help you advocate for yourself throughout college. And I'd encourage you to check those and what schools may have those, but also think about what's important to you. What kind of learning environment are you looking at? Yes, major is important. Yes, size is important. Those types of things are there, but dig deeper into what you're really looking for in a college process. And then there's a lot of opportunities to go check out virtual presentations. UT offers you the opportunity to talk to students. Texas State gives presentations virtually. You can do campus tours with schools. Hopefully your specific high school is offering virtual presentations where they're bringing in admissions counselors to talk to you all virtually. There's a lot of resources that you can use to get to know colleges, but also don't shy away from things like College Board's Big Future program, where you can really see I'd say a 30,000 foot above look at what colleges might be perfect for you or might be a good fit for you, and then dig deeper into those.
Thank you, Nick. Do any other panelists have any insight into this question?
I mentioned this earlier, like picking up the phone. I think there's two skills that come to mind in addition to having these questions and doing your college research. Two skills. One is, picking up that phone, becoming a young professional, checking your email. And the second part of that is empowering yourselves to be an advocate of your own self. Like self-advocacy can go so long. Never apologize for help. Never apologize asking for help. Reaching out to individuals, to counselors, like, well, can you point me to the right person? This is for you and you all deserve it. So, don't be afraid to ask for support.
Thank you. And it looks like Josue, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I just wanted to echo what Nick and Christina said. I remember when I was a senior in high school, my high school counselor, bless his heart, she had a lot of trouble helping me because there were not a lot of undocumented students in my school. And I think what Christina mentioned, sort of like learning how to advocate for yourself and taking that initiative once again to be your own outreach and asking for help, it makes a tremendous difference. It also shows colleges or universities that you're interested in, that you're going out of your way to look into their systems and their education. I also wanted to mention what Nick mentioned about the 2-year and 4-year colleges. That is very important too. I went to community college and then on to a 4-year university. But there are other, there are private schools and state schools that have those scholarships and grants. For undocumented people, I found that a private school, even though it was more expensive, actually gave me a higher scholarship package than the state school, just because there's so much competition. So it's just, once again, taking that initiative and doing that research for yourself.
Thank you all. Now, this is a related question. I bet there's quite a bit of overlap, but someone did ask about for people who, so this, I'll make it 2 in 1. For people who are engaged in that middle ground, transferring from a 2-year to a 4-year, are hoping to make that transfer at this point, are there any specific recommendations you have for those students and families supporting those students? And or for people who are pursuing a graduate education, right? There are many folks who are, there are limited resources at the undergraduate level, but then trying to get to that next step could even be less resource availability. So do folks have any suggestions for either of those two populations, transfer students and or graduate students seeking access to graduate school?
I guess I can talk about transfer students. What really helped me is before you transfer, just know what just like when you first start college, you look at their GPA standards or all those standards and know them because then you have a goal. So for example, for me, I had to have a 3.5 and higher just because that was the bottom line for scholarships. So then I worked, that was my goal throughout my 2-year experience, well, 3 years, but let's not talk about that. Yeah, so having that in mind, and just like there's scholarships for transfer students. There's specific scholarships for transfer students. So don't be afraid to ask. I picked at the brain of the transfer counselor at the University of St. Thomas, and I said, you break down all the scholarships. So because if I'm going to go to a private school, I need to know every penny that is going to be given to me so that I know how much I need to pay. So don't be afraid to do that and just pick at their brains. It's not a bad thing, but.
I'd like to add to what Josue was saying, is in addition to the funding, also thinking about the credits that you have earned up to this point and how many of those credits will transfer to that institution that you're considering, or the other, if it's multiple institutions, talking to the transfer counselor at both your current institution, your 2-year school, and the one to the institutions you're applying to. So making sure that those credits that you worked hard for are all transferred, or the majority of them.
And I'll kind of piggyback off that. So schools will have something. So if you're just starting this process and you're going to go to, a community college next year first, or you're about to start to transfer, schools will have something on their website. Texas State calls them the transfer planning guides, for example, and it will show you exactly what courses to take that will help you through that process. So if you have an idea that you want to end up at, the University of Texas at Arlington, you can take a look at their website to see exactly what is needed. often will caution my students against blindly thinking that I need to go and do 2 years. I have to do 2 years at a community college and then move on. Use these degree planning tools to help decide how long you're going to stay at the community college level. Because oftentimes it might be a year and a half, and then you're out of classes that will transfer, and you want to make sure you're looking at that kind of things when you're deciding when to transfer and where to transfer.
And a good point, just to piggyback off Nick, you can also, if you start a 4-year in a 4-year institution, you can sometimes go to community college and take extra courses, especially you're paying out of pocket or you're paying a substantial amount. Some schools will let you do that. Private school, it's a little different, but it's still possible. But if you can, then why not? If you're in Houston and you're able to go to HTC for a class or 2 in a semester and pay $200 as opposed to however much money you need to pay, it's a good option.
Thanks so much. That was a lot of great input on those subjects. I know we're nearing the end of the time, but just one more question I think we can squeeze in here. We talked about earlier promise programs at institution levels being real sites of opportunity. And there's been a lot of talk legislatively about statewide promise programs and what they may look like. I don't know how familiar everyone is with what's been proposed, but just generally speaking, if there was one model promise program, a program that guaranteed tuition for folks in Texas, what would you all like to see as critical components of it?
First, I'm glad we're asking this question. I mean, this applies not only to our undocumented and documented students, but really to every student. And one of the things that I would have them consider is including financial resources or the money to live on campus, the money to stay on campus, not just the tuition and fees. Connecting them to mental health resources that are super important in any student who's about to start their college career. And, making sure that they have food, that's like super, super important. So that, I think there's a couple more, but for now, I'll just mention those ones.
Thanks so much. So we heard covering costs beyond tuition and fees, connecting to wraparound services, other ideas we want to throw out there into the atmosphere, you never know.
Well, one of the things that just came to mind in my head is that you'll see other states have gone with the 2-year college option is free. I think Tennessee did that and a couple other schools. I would rather it not and be open to 4 years and 2 years colleges in that sense, and making sure that the student has a choice, because ultimately the student needs to be comfortable where they're going and they need to be able to do well. And I think opening up something that says, hey, if you make under a certain amount of money, you can get this amount of credits for free or this amount into your tuition and fees taken care of, and room and board and everything else. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I think Christina and Nick are right on point. Speaking on setting them up for success, just because there's so much data showing the out-of-pocket expenses besides tuition just rising so much. But not only that, but also looking at workforce, at different options that may not necessarily follow the traditional bachelor's of arts, bachelor's of science, but having those workforce options as well, and being very cognizant of the fact that we have a large undocumented population here in Texas. Therefore, sort of like not setting up barriers that are gonna keep these populations from benefiting from this assistance.
Yeah, thanks so much for that input on expanding it beyond 2 years, and that includes 4 years and other workforce training options. So I know that we're at the end of our time, everyone. This has been a really great and robust conversation. Thank you so much panelists for joining us for this conversation. Thank you, Chloe, for being an amazing moderator, Dr. Chloe, for being an amazing moderator, and thank you all attendees for joining us for this conversation. We will certainly be sharing out the recording for you to reference these materials. This is the last event in our Postsecondary Advocates Coalition PAC chat series, but it won't be the last ever, and we will certainly connect with everyone on our future events. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.